He was just 4 years old when the world ended. For 2 days, he sat with the silence, a tiny, terrified sentinel in an apartment that had become a tomb. When the police finally arrived, they saw a disturbed little boy and a mess, and in their haste, they called it a case of child abandonment. They were wrong. This is the story of a child who built a fortress of toys to hide from a monster, and the catastrophic failure of a system that couldn't see the truth hidden in plain sight, a scene so haunting it would break the very cops who walked away from it. Before I begin, thank you for watching. I'd love to know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. It means a lot to know you're here, sharing these stories with me. We're in this together. Now let me tell you the story. The call came in on a Tuesday, during the suffocating, late summer heat of the year 2000. In a city like Atlanta, the sound of a child crying was just part of the urban symphony, background noise that most people learn to filter out. It was a sound of life, of scraped knees and tantrums. But after a while, the sound can change. It can curdle, losing its demanding edges and becoming something thin and mournful. A sound not of life, but of its slow departure. In Unit 2B of the Oakwood Terrace apartments, a tired complex of faded brick, Mrs. Gable had been listening to the sound for nearly 2 days. It had started on Sunday afternoon, an inconsolable sobbing that drilled through the walls and into her head. She had banged on the wall once. The crying had not stopped. By Monday, the sound had changed. The anger in it was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow exhaustion. It was a sound of pure misery, rising and falling in ragged, heartbreaking waves. Miss Gable, her own heart now a heavy, anxious stone, felt a new and unsettling emotion, a deep, creeping dread. Then, on Tuesday morning, the crying stopped. The silence that replaced it was not a relief. It was a thing of terrible, profound weight, a silence that was louder and 1,000 times more terrifying than the crying had ever been. She stood in her living room, her ear pressed against the thin drywall separating her world from the one next door. She heard nothing. No television, no footsteps, just the absolute silence of a life that had inexplicably ceased. After an hour of listening to the nothingness, a cold certainty settled over her. Something was terribly wrong. She picked up the phone, her hand trembling slightly, and dialed 911. The call was dispatched as a low-priority welfare check, assigned to Officer Amelia Cates. At 26, she was 2 years out of the academy, still young enough to believe she could make a difference. She had answered 100 calls just like this one. 9 times out of 10, it was nothing, but there was always that one time. The one call that started as routine and ended as a nightmare that would burrow its way into your memory and refuse to leave. She pulled into the sprawling parking lot of the Oakwood Terrace apartments. The building seemed to sag under the oppressive heat. She met Mrs. Gable, a small, bird-like woman with fear in her eyes. "He cried for 2 days," the old woman whispered. "And now, nothing. It ain't right." Officer Cates felt the first prickle of unease. She walked up the echoing stairs to the second floor, her hand resting on the reassuring weight of her service weapon. She stopped in front of apartment 2A. The silence was profound. She knocked, a loud, authoritative rap. "Atlanta PD," she called out. "Is anyone home?" There was no answer, just the heavy, unsettling silence from the other side of the door. She knocked again, harder this time. The silence was the only reply. The prickle of unease was now a cold, spreading dread. This was it. This was the one time. The landlord, Mr. Henderson, arrived with a jangling ring of keys, his face a mask of mild annoyance. He grumbled about the tenant in 2A, a single mother named Serena Washington, describing her as usually quiet and always on time with the rent. He seemed more worried about a vacant unit than a human tragedy. He slid a key into the lock. The deadbolt clicked loudly in the unnatural stillness. He pushed the door open, and a wave of stale, thick air washed over them. Then he stopped, his body an unmoving obstacle in the doorway. He just stood there, his expression of annoyance melting into profound, slack-jawed confusion. "What in God's name?" he whispered. Officer Cates gently moved him aside and stepped into the apartment, her training taking over. The first thing that hit her was the smell. It was not the unmistakable odor of decomposition she had been trained to recognize. This was something else. It was a faint, cloying, sickly sweet smell, like flowers left in a vase too long, mixed with something vaguely chemical she couldn't identify. It was a smell that was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The second thing she noticed was the suffocating silence, a quiet that seemed to have a physical weight. The living room was in a state of bizarre, ritualistic disarray. And then, she saw him. In the center of the room, on a small cartoon character rug, sat a little boy. He was tiny, no more than 4 years old, with big, beautiful, and completely vacant brown eyes. He was rocking in a slow, silent, metronomic motion. He was alive, but he wasn't there. His eyes were open, but they saw nothing. He was a ghost in his own small body. What surrounded him made the scene so deeply and chillingly unsettling. He had built a fortress, a perfect, circular wall, about 2 feet high, constructed with meticulous precision from every soft and movable object in the room. Couch cushions, throw pillows, stuffed animals, blankets, and every single toy he owned had been carefully placed to create an unbroken barrier between himself and the rest of the world. It was not the messy creation of a child at play. It was the deliberate, desperate act of a person building a shelter from a storm already inside his head. Officer Cates had seen a lot in her 2 years, but she had never seen anything like this. This was a scene of quiet, profound, and disturbing horror. The child, the fortress, the smell, the silence. It was a tableau of a trauma so deep it had broken the world of this small, silent boy. She knelt down, her heart a heavy drum. "Hey there, little guy," she said, her voice soft in the dead air. "My name is Amelia. I'm a police officer. I'm here to help you." These not verstons why did for the screams. The boy did not respond. He did not look at her. He just kept rocking. A prisoner in his self-made fortress of solitude. Officer Cates, a woman trained to deal with the simple facts of a crime, was now faced with a mystery written not in blood, but in the silent language of a child's unbearable grief. She stood up and reached for her radio. She did not know what had happened in this apartment, but she knew this was not a welfare check. This was a crime scene. Detective David Miller arrived 45 minutes later, moving with the slow, unimpressed swagger of a man who believed he had already seen every variation of human depravity. In his late 40s, with a face that was a roadmap of cheap coffee and too many cigarettes, he was a man worn down to a hard, cynical nub by 2 decades in homicide. He saw not people, but patterns. He saw not tragedies, but case numbers. He stepped out of his unmarked sedan into the oppressive afternoon heat. He saw the apartment building, and his first filter clicked into place. This was the South Side, a working-class neighborhood, a place of single mothers who were, in his experience, always one bad decision away from disaster. He walked up the stairs, his mind already writing the story. He entered the apartment and saw Officer Cates, her young face a mask of troubled concern. Then he saw the scene. The little boy, rocking in his strange fortress of toys. He took it all in with a single, sweeping, almost dismissive glance. His second, most powerful filter clicked into place. The single mother, the messy apartment, the abandoned child. He had seen this 100 times before. A young mother, overwhelmed and undersupported, finally cracks. She packs a bag, walks out the door, and doesn't look back. It was a tragedy, of a sort, but in his world, it was not a crime. It was just another Tuesday. "What have we got, Cates?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble devoid of any real curiosity. "I'm not sure, Detective," Cates replied, her voice quiet and unsettled. "The tenant in 2B called it in, said the boy had been crying for 2 days, and then this morning, he just went silent. The landlord let me in. The boy he's not responsive. And the smell in here, it's strange." Miller took a long, slow sniff of the air. He caught the faint, sickly sweet odor that had so unsettled Cates. But to him, it was not a mystery. It was a confirmation. "It's spoiled milk and old diapers, rookie," he said, his tone a mixture of weary, patronizing authority. "It's the smell of neglect. You get used to it." He completely, and with the absolute confidence of a man certain he was right, dismissed the true source of the smell. He walked over to the boy's makeshift fortress. He looked down at the silent, rocking child and felt not sympathy, but a detached, professional pity. The boy was a problem to be solved, a piece of human debris to be handed off to the proper social services agency. "What's the mother's name?" he asked, his eyes scanning the room for telltale signs of a hasty departure. "Serena Washington," Cates replied. "The landlord says she's 28, a preschool teacher." Miller grunted, a small, cynical sound. "A preschool teacher," he repeated, the words a quiet, dismissive indictment. "Guess she didn't feel like teaching this one anymore." He saw a closed door at the end of the short hallway. "That the bedroom?" "I assume so," Kate said. "I haven't opened it. I wanted to wait for you, to preserve the scene." Miller almost laughed. "Preserve what scene?" he said, his voice tired and condescending. "This isn't a crime scene, Cates. This is a social services issue. Mom's gone, kids here. It's sad, it's ugly. But it's not a homicide. There's no body. There's no blood. There's just a messy apartment and a kid who's probably better off without her." His snap judgment was a thing of brutal, systemic efficiency. He had seen the pattern, and he had fit the facts to match it. He was not looking for a mystery. He was looking for the quickest path to a closed case. The jaded detective had arrived, he had seen, and he had, with the full authority of his badge, completely failed to conquer the truth. He had, in fact, just helped to bury it. The failure of the system was not a loud, catastrophic explosion, but a series of quiet, seemingly insignificant decisions, each a logical step on a path that led to a horrifying destination. It was a failure born not of malice, but of indifference, orchestrated by a man so certain in his own biased assessment that he never considered the possibility he could be wrong. Detective Miller, having made his judgment, now set the wheels of that indifferent system into motion. His first call was not to forensics, but to the Department of Family and Child Services. He spoke with a tired-sounding caseworker, his voice a flat, unemotional monotone as he relayed the details. "Got a 4-year-old male, name's Leo Washington," he said. "Mother's name is Serena Washington, 28. She's flown the coop, a parent-child abandonment. The kid's catatonic. You need to send a unit to pick him up." The conversation was a model of bureaucratic efficiency, a problem identified, a problem handed off. In Miller's mind, his part in the story was over. His second act of failure was a conversation with the landlord, Mr. Henderson, who was still hovering in the hallway. "All right," Miller said, pulling the door to 2A closed behind him. "We're done here. Child Protective Services is on their way to take the boy. As far as we're concerned, this is not a crime scene. It's an abandoned property. Once they've got the kid, you can go in and clean the place out." The words were a death sentence. With a few casual, careless words, he had just authorized the destruction of a crime scene. He had condemned the one piece of evidence that could have told him the truth, the body of Serena Washington, to be found not by a detective, but by a cleaning crew. The closed bedroom door was the most crucial detail in this chain of catastrophic failure. Officer Cates, her own deep unease still a cold knot in her stomach, had tried one last time to push back. "Detective," she had said, her voice quiet but persistent. "Shouldn't we at least clear the other room, just to be sure?" Miller had turned to her, his face a mask of pure, weary impatience. "Be sure of what, Cates?" he shot back. "That she's not in there, hiding under the bed? She's a runner, not a hostage. We've got a missing person, not a homicide. Do you want to waste half a day waiting for a warrant to search a room for a woman who is probably halfway to Florida by now?" The power dynamic was an insurmountable wall. He was the veteran detective. She was the rookie. To challenge him further would have been professional suicide. So, she did what she was trained to do. She deferred to a superior officer. She silenced her own screaming instincts and became part of the system's failure. The landlord, Mr. Henderson, motivated by profit, had been given the all clear. He saw the mess in the living room as evidence of a tenant who had broken her lease. He didn't think about the closed bedroom door. The police had never conducted a full search. And so, the terrible truth hidden behind that one unopened door was left to fester in the dark. a secret now protected by a wall of institutional, catastrophic indifference. Dr. Alafia Booker lived in a world of quiet, nuanced observation. As a child psychologist and one of the city's leading experts in early childhood trauma, her office was not a cold, sterile clinic, but a warm, sun-filled room filled with comfortable furniture, colorful books, and toys that were tools for communication. She was a woman in her late 30s with a calm, reassuring presence and kind, intelligent eyes trained to see not just what a child did, but why they did it. She was a translator for the silent language of a child's pain. Leo Washington was brought to her 2 days after he was found. The CPS caseworker had taken him from the apartment, a deeply unsettling process. He had not cried or resisted. He had simply and silently allowed himself to be lifted from the center of his fortress. He was taken to an emergency foster home, where well-meaning strangers had been unable to break through the impenetrable wall of his catatonia. He had not eaten. He had not spoken. He was a small, silent statue of a grief so profound it had completely shut down his world. When he was brought into Dr. Booker's office, he was a small, fragile ghost. Dr. Booker did not try to engage him directly. She simply created a safe space, having him placed on a soft sheepskin rug while she sat on the floor a few feet away, a quiet, non-threatening presence. She had read his file. She had read the brief, dismissive police report written by Detective Miller. The story was simple: child abandonment. But as Dr. Booker looked at the silent boy in front of her, she knew with the unshakable certainty of her professional experience that the story was a lie. Neglect, she knew, has its own recognizable signatures. A neglected child is often withdrawn or anxious, but rarely, if ever, catatonic. Catatonia is not the result of an absence of care. It is the result of a presence, the presence of a trauma so violent, so overwhelming, that the child's mind mercifully shuts down to protect itself. It is a response to unspeakable horror. And then, there was the matter of the fortress. The police report had described it as part of the mess, but Dr. Booker saw it for what it was. It was not a mess. It was a map. It was a symbolic, deeply meaningful act of self-preservation. He had been building a barrier, a sacred, protective circle to keep the monster out. But the monster, she knew, was already inside. It was a memory so terrible it had stolen his voice, his movement, his very presence in the world. She looked at Leo, and she saw not the victim of simple neglect. She saw a witness. She saw the sole, silent survivor of a violent, terrible event. The police had declared the apartment a non-crime scene, but Dr. Booker knew, with a cold, sickening certainty, that a horrific crime had been committed. The evidence was not in the apartment. The evidence was sitting right in front of her, a 4-year-old boy who had seen a ghost and, as a result, had become one himself. Her job now was not just to heal him. It was to listen to his silence and find a way to give his testimony, a testimony she was sure would not be about a mother who had left, but about a monster who had come and destroyed his entire world. Lena Johnson arrived in Atlanta on a Greyhound bus, a journey of 1,200 miles that had been a blur of frantic phone calls, cheap coffee, and a cold, suffocating dread. She was Serena's older sister, a woman in her early 30s with the same kind eyes but a jawline set with stubborn determination. She had always been the fierce, protective one, the one who looked out for her quieter, gentler younger sister. The news of Serena's disappearance and her nephew's silent condition had been a brutal physical blow. She had been on the phone with police and social workers, and they had all told her the same impossible story. Serena had left. She had abandoned her child. The narrative was so completely at odds with the sister she knew that it was not just a lie, it was an absurdity. Serena lived for her son. Leo was the center of her universe. The idea that she would have callously walked away from him was a convenient, lazy fiction, created by a system too tired to look for the truth. Her first stop was the police precinct, a cold, intimidating fortress of bureaucratic authority. She was there to see the man whose name was on the report, the man who had not just failed to find her sister, but who had callously condemned her in her absence. She was there to see Detective Miller. The confrontation took place in the same small, cluttered office. Lena did not sit down. She stood before his desk, a small but unmovable force of familial righteous fury. "I am Serena Washington's sister," she began, her voice low and steady, "and I am here to tell you that you are wrong. My sister did not abandon her son. Something has happened to her, and you are not doing your job to find her." Miller leaned back in his squeaky chair, the familiar sound of condescension filling the room. He had had this conversation 100 times before. The grieving, delusional family member, unable to accept the ugly truth. "Ma'am," he began with a gravelly, patronizing sigh, "I understand this is a difficult time, but the evidence at the scene is clear. Your sister packed a bag and she left. It's a tragedy, but it's not a crime." "What evidence?" Lena shot back, her voice sharp and incredulous. "You found a messy apartment and a terrified, traumatized little boy. That's not evidence of abandonment. That's evidence of a struggle. Did you search the apartment? Did you dust for prints? Did you talk to her friends? Did you do anything besides decide in the first 5 minutes that a single, black mother from the South Side must be a bad one?" Her words hit their mark. The accusation of lazy, systemic bias touched a raw, defensive nerve. His face hardened, his eyes narrowing into cold, angry slits. "You don't get to come in here and tell me how to do my job," he growled. "I saw what I saw. The case is closed. Your sister is a missing person, and until we have any evidence to the contrary, that is how it will stay. Now, I suggest you go and deal with your nephew. He is your problem now." The words were a dismissal, a brutal slamming of a door in her face. He was not going to help her. He was the system, and the system had made up its mind. Lena looked at him, at his angry, defensive face, and felt not defeat, but a new surge of cold, hard resolve. She was not just fighting for her sister anymore. She was fighting against him. "This is not over, detective," she said, her voice a quiet, venomous promise. "This is not even close to being over." She turned and walked out of his office, her head held high. The battle lines had been drawn. The first meeting between Lena Johnson and Dr. Alafia Booker was a somber affair, a meeting of two strong, intelligent women united by a sacred purpose: to find the truth for a little boy who could not speak it himself. They met in Dr. Booker's warm, sun-filled office, a place that felt 1,000,000 miles away from the cold, indifferent world of the police precinct. Lena, met with condescension at every other turn, finally found herself in the presence of someone who believed her. Dr. Booker explained her assessment with calm, compassionate clarity. "Leo is not the victim of neglect, Lena," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "He is the witness to a horrific, violent trauma. His mind has built a wall to protect himself from a memory that is too terrible to bear. Our job now is to create a safe space here, where he can begin to tell us his story, not with his words, but with his actions." The tool for this silent testimony was a dollhouse. It was not a toy, but a precise therapeutic instrument, a miniature replica of apartment 2A. Dr. Booker had had it custom built from crime scene photos and a floor plan. Every detail was exact, from the color of the walls to the pattern on the small cartoon character rug. It was a stage where Leo could, if he felt safe enough, reenact the terrible, silent play trapped inside his head. The therapy sessions were a slow, painstaking process. For the first few meetings, Leo wouldn't even look at the dollhouse. But Lena and Dr. Booker were patient. Lena would sit with him, singing the same soft lullabies that Serena had sung to him. Then, one afternoon, it happened. Leo, his movements slow and dreamlike, crawled over to the dollhouse. He reached out a small, trembling hand and began to play. But it was not a play of joy. It was a play of pure, terrifying memory. He picked up the plastic figures, the mommy doll and the boy doll. He placed them in the miniature living room, making them dance. Then, he stopped. He looked over at the other dolls and selected a large, imposing male figure with a hard, angry plastic face. The monster. He brought the monster doll into the living room. He made it shout, a silent, mimed act of rage. Then, he took the monster doll and made it strike the mommy doll. The mommy doll fell to the floor, a limp plastic thing. Lena, watching from across the room, let out an involuntary gasp. But what Leo did next was the most chilling and revelatory part of his silent testimony. He took the limp mommy doll and dragged her slowly across the floor of the dollhouse, down the short hallway, and into the master bedroom. He opened the tiny plastic door of the bedroom closet. He placed the mommy doll inside, hiding her under a small piece of fabric representing a pile of clothes. Then, he closed the closet door. He then took the boy doll back to the living room. With meticulous precision, he began to build a wall. He took the miniature couch cushions, the small plastic toys, and built a perfect, circular fortress around the boy doll, sealing him in. He had not just reenacted a murder. He had reenacted the entire horrific sequence of the crime and its aftermath. He was not telling them that his mother had left. He was telling them, in the only way he knew how, that she was still there. She was hidden. She was in the closet. She had never, for a single moment, left him. And he had been left alone with her, a silent, terrified little boy guarding the terrible, sacred secret of her tomb. The dollhouse testimony was a bombshell, a silent confession that landed with the force of a brutal blow. Lena and Dr. Booker sat in the quiet office after Leo had left, the miniature, terrible tableau still laid out on the floor. The air was thick with a new, sickening understanding. The fight for the truth had just become 1,000 times more urgent and terrifying. "He's not saying she left," Lena whispered, her voice ragged and disbelieving, her eyes fixed on the tiny, closed closet door. "He's saying she's still in the apartment. He's been trying to tell us. She's in the closet." The words, spoken aloud, were a thing of unimaginable horror. The sickly, sweet smell that Officer Cates had noted, the smell Miller had so casually dismissed it, was the smell of death. Dr. Booker, her own face a pale, grim mask, nodded slowly. "His testimony is consistent and unwavering," she said, her voice quiet and clinical, but profoundly disturbed. "He has reenacted this exact sequence 6 times. From a clinical perspective, this is not a fantasy. This is a memory seared into his brain. We have to go back to the police. We have to make them listen." The second confrontation with Detective Miller was even more hostile than the first. They met him in the same cluttered office, a space that now felt to Lena like the heart of the indifferent, broken system. This time, they were armed not just with a sister's intuition, but with the expert testimony of a respected child psychologist. Dr. Booker laid out her findings with calm, clinical precision, explaining the nature of childhood trauma and the irrefutable meaning of Leo's symbolic, consistent play. His actions, she explained, were a direct and literal communication, a cry for help, a map to his mother's body. Miller listened, his arms crossed, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated skepticism. He looked from Dr. Booker to Lena and saw not a credible case, but a conspiracy of two hysterical women feeding each other's delusions. "A dollhouse," he said, his voice a low, sarcastic sneer. "You're telling me that you want me to get a search warrant for an apartment that has already been cleared, based on a 4-year-old playing with a dollhouse? Are you serious?" "I am telling you, Detective, Dr. Booker replied, her voice taking on a hard, professional edge, "that you have a credible and traumatized witness who is telling you, in the only way he can, that there is a dead body in that apartment. Your failure to act on this information is not just professional negligence. It is a moral one." Miller's face flushed an angry red. His ego, his professional pride, his identity as a man who was always right, was under direct assault. And so, he did what all such men do when cornered by the truth. He doubled down on his lie. "The apartment has been cleared," he stated, his voice a loud, authoritative bark. "I cleared it myself. It is now private property. The landlord has already started to clean it out. I am not going back there. Not for you, not for her, and not for some voodoo dollhouse story. This conversation is over." He stood up, a clear signal they were being dismissed. The wall of his indifference was now a fortress of his defensive, angry pride. He was a man actively participating in the cover-up of his own catastrophic mistake. The fight was no longer just against a flawed system. It was now a direct personal war against a man who would rather let a murdered woman rot in a closet than ever admit he had been wrong. The wall Detective Miller had built around his mistake was a formidable one, a fortress of bureaucratic and personal pride that seemed utterly impenetrable. Lena and Dr. Booker had hit a dead end. They had the truth, screamed at them through the silent actions of a 4-year-old boy, but they had no way to make the system listen. But Lena was not a woman guided by logic. She was guided by a fierce, unshakable love for her sister and for the small, broken boy left behind. She began to look for a crack in the wall, a single point of weakness. Her mind kept returning to one person, the young, empathetic patrol officer who had been first on the scene, Officer Amelia Cates. Cates had been haunted by the case. The image of Leo Washington, the silent boy in his bizarre fortress of toys, had refused to stay in its box. It had followed her home, creeping into her dreams. There were 2 things she could not shake. The first was the look in the boy's eyes. They were not the eyes of a sad or lonely child. They were the eyes of a person who had seen the end of the world, a look of profound, bottomless horror. The second was the smell. Miller had dismissed it as spoiled milk and diapers, but Cates knew in her gut he was wrong. It wasn't the smell of neglect. It was something else. Something sweeter, stranger, something that had made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The official story was a lie. Lena found her working a late shift, sitting in her patrol car in the parking lot of a closed-down convenience store. Lena approached the car, tapped on the window, and Cates, with an expression of weary recognition, rolled it down. "Officer Cates," Lena began. "I'm Lena Johnson. I'm Serena Washington's sister." Cates nodded slowly. "I know who you are," she said, her voice low and guarded. "I'm sorry for your loss." "My sister isn't lost, officer," Lena replied, her voice gaining a hard, determined edge. "She was taken, and her son is trying to tell us what happened, but no one will listen. No one but me. And, I think, maybe you." "So," Lena told her. She told her about Dr. Booker, the dollhouse, and Leo's silent, horrifying testimony. She told her about the monster, the mommy doll, and the tiny closed closet door. As Cates listened, the vague doubt that had been haunting her crystallized into a sharp, sickening certainty. The dollhouse story was not a fantasy. It was the key. It was the one explanation that made sense of everything that had felt so wrong that day. The fortress, the vacant eyes, the strange, cloying smell. It all clicked into place, a terrible, horrifying puzzle now complete. "I knew it," Cates whispered, her voice ragged and angry. "I knew something wasn't right. Miller. He just blew it off. He didn't want to see it." She was in a dangerous position. To openly challenge a veteran detective like Miller would be a career-ending move, but to do nothing was now a moral impossibility. She looked at Lena and saw a kindred spirit, a fellow warrior in a fight for justice itself. "I can't officially reopen the case," Cates said, her voice a low conspiratorial whisper. "Miller would shut it down and have my badge, but I can unofficially review my notes. I can look at the preliminary report again. I can see if there's anything at all, that we missed, any small detail that could give us the leverage we need to force his hand." It was not a promise of victory, but it was a promise of a fight. It was a crack in the wall, a small, fragile glimmer of hope in a case consumed by darkness and despair. Lena Johnson was no longer alone. She had found her ally. While Officer Cates began her quiet, clandestine review of the police's flawed initial investigation, Lena began her own. She knew the key to finding her sister was to understand the last few weeks of her life. She needed to find the monster from the dollhouse, the faceless doll Leo had so consistently and terrifyingly brought into his reenactment. She needed to give that monster a name and a face. She started with Serena's friends, a small, tight-knit circle of young women adrift in grief and confusion. They met in a quiet coffee shop, where they could speak freely. At first, the friends were hesitant, scared. The official story was that Serena had run away, and while none of them believed it, the alternative that she had been the victim of a violent crime was almost too terrifying to contemplate. But Lena, with her quiet, determined strength, slowly broke through their fear. She asked them about Serena's life, her work, her dreams, and then she asked about the men in her life. That was when a new, sinister character entered the story. His name was Marcus Thorne. He was a man Serena had been dating for a few months. On the surface, her friends explained, he was perfect. Handsome, charismatic, and seemingly devoted to Serena. He would bring her flowers and dote on Leo. He was the picture of the perfect boyfriend. But underneath that polished exterior, there was a darkness. Serena had confessed to them in worried conversations that Marcus had a side that scared her. He was possessive, jealous. He had a temper, a sudden, frightening flash of rage he could turn on and off like a light switch. He would check her phone, question her about her friends. He was a man who needed to be in control. And Serena, a strong, independent woman, was not a woman who could be controlled. The final, most chilling piece of the puzzle came from Serena's best friend, Keisha. Serena, Keisha explained, had been planning to break up with him. She had told Keisha just days before she disappeared that she was going to end the relationship. She was scared of his reaction, but she knew she had to do it. The monster now had a face, and he had a motive. It was not a random act of violence. It was a crime of passion, of possessive, controlling rage. Marcus Thorne, the charming boyfriend, had been rejected, and he had, in a fit of murderous, narcissistic fury, silenced the woman who had dared to leave him. The story was now a clear, horrifyingly straight line, but knowing and proving were two very different things. Marcus Thorne, Lena discovered, had been questioned by Detective Miller in the early, cursory stages of the missing person investigation. And he had, of course, a perfect alibi. He told police that he and Serena had had a small argument on the Sunday she disappeared. He had then, he claimed, left to spend the evening with friends, a story his friends corroborated. His alibi was a fortress, a wall of lies built on the single, catastrophic mistake made by Detective Miller. The police had a time of disappearance. They did not have a time of death. And so, Marcus Thorne, the handsome, charming monster, was free, protected by a system that had not just failed to find his victim but had given him the perfect cover for his crime. The fight for the truth had just become a race against time. The relentless combined pressure from Lena, Dr. Booker, and the quiet, behind-the-scenes work of Officer Cates finally began to move the immovable object of the Atlanta Police Department. Lena, armed with the credible new information about Marcus Thorne, hired a young, idealistic lawyer, the same indomitable Ben Carter who would, years later, fight for justice for Tiana Washington. Ben Carter, using Dr. Booker's powerful official report, filed a motion in family court. He did not argue that a murder had been committed. He argued that the city had a legal and moral obligation to exhaust every possible avenue for the well-being of a traumatized minor. He argued that Leo Washington, a child in the state's care, could not begin his recovery until the source of his trauma, the fate of his mother, was definitively determined. And that, he argued, required a second, more thorough search of the last place she had been seen alive. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense older woman who had seen the worst of the city's broken systems, agreed. She signed a court order, a legal document that could not be ignored. It did not order a criminal investigation. It ordered a welfare check, a re-examination of Apartment 2A, a task designed to bring closure to a traumatized child. The court order landed on Detective Miller's desk like a grenade. He was furious. He was embarrassed. He had been outmaneuvered by a grieving sister, a shrink, and a slick young lawyer. He was being forced to return to a scene he had personally declared a non-crime scene. His humiliation was a palpable, volcanic thing. He was legally obligated to execute the court order. He assembled a small, sullen team to return to the Oakwood Terrace apartments, and at his elbow, a quiet, unmovable presence, was Officer Cates. She had heard about the court order and insisted on being part of the team. Miller had tried to refuse, but Cates, her voice respectful but unshakable, had simply stated, "I was the first officer on the scene, Detective. The court order is for a welfare check. I need to be there." Miller, his face a thunderous cloud, was forced to agree. He knew, in that moment, that she was no longer just a rookie. She was a witness to his failure. The drive back to the apartment building was a tense, silent one. They met the landlord, Mr. Henderson, in the parking lot. He was a nervous, sweaty mess. He explained that he had, as the detective authorized, sent a cleaning crew into the apartment. They had cleared out the living room, bagging up the toys and the cushions. They didn't go in the bedroom, though, he stammered, his eyes darting between Miller and Kate's. The smell, it was stronger from that room. They were going to do it today. The words hung in the hot, still air. The smell, the one detail that had haunted Kate's, the one clue Miller had so arrogantly dismissed. They walked up the stairs, a somber procession on their way to a final, terrible judgment. The landlord fumbled with the key, his hand shaking so badly it took him 3 tries to get the door open. He pushed it open, and the smell, the faint, sickly sweet odor that had been a mystery, was now a powerful, undeniable wave of putrescence. It was the smell of death, a smell allowed to fester for a week, protected by a wall of institutional and human failure. The second search had begun. The apartment was a ghost of what it had been a week earlier. The living room, which had been the scene of Leo's bizarre fortress, was now a sterile, empty box. The cleaning crew had done its job. The toys were gone. The cushions were gone. The small, colorful cartoon character rug was rolled up in a corner, a sad monument to a stolen childhood. The only thing that remained was the silence and the smell. The odor was now an overwhelming, suffocating presence. It was a thick, tangible thing, a cloying, sickly, sweet miasma that coated the back of their throats and made their eyes water. It was emanating, with a terrible and undeniable certainty, from the one place in the apartment that had not been touched, not been searched, not been opened. The closed bedroom door. The small group of officers stood in the empty living room, a frozen, silent tableau of dawning, sickening horror. The air was thick with the stench of death, but it was also thick with the unspoken, terrible weight of their own catastrophic failure. They were not investigators arriving at a fresh crime scene. They were ghosts, returning to the scene of a crime they had unknowingly and unforgivably abandoned. Detective Miller's face was a pale, ghastly shade of gray. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a look of profound, dawning sickness. He knew, in that moment, with the overwhelming stench of decomposition filling his nostrils, he knew. He knew the hysterical sister had been right. He knew the psychobabble of the child psychologist had been true. And he knew that the young rookie at his side, whose instincts he had so cruelly dismissed, had been right all along. He was not just a detective on a case anymore. He was a culprit, a man whose own arrogant failure had allowed a murdered woman to lie undiscovered for a week, just a few feet from where he had stood, and declared her a runaway. It was Officer Cates who moved first. She walked, her steps slow and deliberate, across the empty living room and down the short hallway. She put her hand on the cold brass doorknob of the bedroom. She looked back at Miller, her eyes not with a look of triumph or of "I told you so," but with a look of profound, shared sadness. And then, she opened the door. The smell that washed over them was a physical, brutal blow. It was the smell of a week of decay in a sealed, hot room. It was the smell of a nightmare. And inside the room, in the far corner, was a closet. And the closet door was slightly ajar. Miller, his movements now slow and almost robotic, walked past Kate's and into the bedroom. He pushed the closet door open. And there, hidden under a pile of clothes, just as the little boy's silent, terrible testimony had predicted, was the body of Serena Washington. The truth, in all its ugly, horrific finality, was revealed. She had been murdered in her own home, and her son, her 4-year-old and now forever broken son, had been left alone with her body, in the dark, for 2 long, unimaginable days. The horror of their initial catastrophic mistake finally and completely broke the jaded, cynical shell of Detective David Miller. He turned away from the closet, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated agony. He leaned against the wall, and a deep, gut-wrenching sob, the sound of a man's soul cracking in half, was torn from his chest. The other officers, their own faces pale and stricken, looked away, unable to watch. The scene had not just revealed a murder. It had revealed a truth so terrible that it had broken them all. The arrest of Marcus Thorne, the handsome and charming boyfriend, was a swift, anticlimactic affair. His alibi, so perfect and impenetrable when police believed Serena had disappeared on a Sunday night, was now a useless, transparent lie. The discovery of Serena's body had given them a new, accurate timeline for the murder. Faced with new, undeniable facts, his alibi and his carefully constructed identity crumbled into dust. The story became a local sensation, a tale of almost mythical quality. The story of the silent little boy who had guarded his mother's tomb and the cops who had walked away became a cautionary tale, an indictment of a broken system. Detective Miller quietly took an early retirement, unable to face the shame or the pity in his colleagues' eyes. The story of his failure led to a complete overhaul of the city's protocols for welfare checks, a system now known informally and with a grim reverence as Leo's Law. The story ends months later. The suffocating heat of summer has given way to the cool, crisp air of autumn. Leo is living with his Aunt Lena now, in a small, quiet house with a big green backyard, a world away from the faded brick of the Oakwood Terrace apartments. His recovery has been a slow, painful journey, a daily battle fought with the help of Dr. Booker and the fierce, unconditional love of his new mother. He still has nightmares. He still has days when the silence descends upon him, when the ghost of the monster he saw comes back to haunt him. But the light is slowly returning to his eyes. He is beginning to play again, to laugh again, to be a 4-year-old boy again. In the final scene, Lena is tucking him into bed. The room is dark and quiet, the only light a soft yellow glow from the hallway. She smooths his hair back from his forehead, and she leans down and kisses his cheek. "I love you, Leo," she whispers, her voice a soft, steady anchor in the quiet, dark room. He looks up at her, his big brown eyes clear and present, truly seeing her for the first time. And then, he speaks. His first word since the ordeal, a word that is not a cry or a scream, but a quiet, perfect, and infinitely powerful word. Mommy. The end. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.